Hey everyone, welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Connor Bronson, and I'm delighted to be joined in New York today by Nick Cobb, Head of Product and Engineering at Kyte, an on-demand vehicle delivery startup. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, really excited to have you here. It's fun to kind of be in person at an event like this at LeadDev and have this opportunity to dive into quite a bit of exciting things that are happening in the space right now.
Absolutely.
One of which is maybe exciting as a low phrase for this. Infamous probably at this point, the SVB bank run that just occurred recently as we're recording.
Mm-hmm.
I know this has been a meteor that's kind of hit the startup space and it really readjusted some of the topics we were planning to talk about. As an angel investor yourself, obviously someone who's been heavily involved in the startup space for years, both on a personal, professional level, I'd love to get your take on the impacts initially from this historic event.
Yeah. I think the initial impact Thursday, lots of people scrambling, trying to figure out, what to do, whether or not they needed to move their money or, play catch up with other fundraising, things like that, and do damage control.
Oh man.
I think as Friday rolled around, a lot of people had either made that decision or were still trying to, weigh what the outcome was going to be. And I think a lot of founders, like a couple that I talked to, they're looking at that decision between having 18, 20 months of runway go down to like 4 to 6 months and
Yeah.
trying to make some new decisions. So definitely had an impact on a lot of folks. And I think, now that it's kind of played itself out a little bit, they're feeling a little bit safer as, depositors are made whole. But I think now, folks are starting to think about what are the risks in my business? How
Yes.
quickly can I get profitable? And if they didn't hear that message already, they're doing it for sure now. So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
been funny to hear the word geodiversity in banking. That phrase has come up a lot here in the last few days.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I wasn't hearing that often beforehand.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really clear this is reframed how people are thinking about financial risk.
Totally.
And I'll say, like, personally, I think you and I both kind of agree that it's a positive that depositors are made whole. Otherwise, there were potentially thousands of companies that weren't going to make payroll
Yeah.
off of this. But it's a controversial thing. Did it personally impact you at Kyte?
We were minimally impacted. I think we had some exposure to like partners. I think, Rippling and a couple other companies that help deal with payroll, they were interfaced with Silicon Valley Bank in some way. And so, we weren't necessarily directly impacted in a massive way, but we've had to kind of work with those partners to kind of navigate around the problem and, kind of move things around as needed. So
Yeah, it's been
yeah.
interesting as a B2B business, like the one I work for, where Linear B looked at it and said, okay, like similar to you, we
Yeah.
weren't expecting to have major impacts. Sure, it would have some impact on us, but the second order impacts were very scary, right? Where it's like, are other banks going to fail? Is this going to cause many of our customers to have to say, oh, we can't renew because we simply don't have the runway to go forward with this anymore?
Yeah.
So I think that was something where the initial piece of this puzzle was concerning enough, but the second order impacts could have been so much greater.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you think this result of having depositors made whole, but the ecosystem kind of showing its cracks will mean for the technology space and startups in general and how folks are going to react to it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was already a trend, say like capital's not free anymore. We're not just,
Totally.
funding ideas and, some of the crazy stuff. Can't just get fundraise based on your background and, no traction and things anymore. I mean, I think a couple of things I've seen so far, in B2B space in particular, folks saying, hey, like we're probably going to delay payments until we can kind of like create
Yeah.
that geodiversity that you were talking about, or until the situation's resolved with depositors like fully. I think a couple of others has been, hey, we're not only taking payments in this account now. You got to update all your accounts payable and like the place where you actually send your payment, the platform in which you're using. We're now using this other one, and so how they do their AR has changed a little bit, and we've had to change a little bit of our AP and stuff like that. Um, I think like the companies that are going through this, they're job creators, they're entrepreneurs, they're doing hard stuff. Don't start a company unless you feel super passionate about it because you're going to
Oh
deal with
yeah.
everything from growth challenges to employment issues to bank runs. So, yeah, I think we can add this to the list of things that founders have to deal with, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Do you have any advice for founders as they go through this process or face these other impactful challenges?
yeah, I mean, I think, remember why you started the company. A lot of times, like we go through the same thing at Kyte. I definitely went through this at Uber. Lots of news. There's always going to be something going around. There's always going to be something to try to pull your attention in various places. Like, keep your head down, keep working. If you believe in the mission, like, just keep going. So,
More generally, as someone who's been very involved in angel investing yourself, I'm curious if this reframes how you think about risk for early stage companies
yeah.
at all. Whether it's like, okay, are you now thinking more about, is this company based in Silicon Valley or is it based
Mm,
elsewhere? And
yeah.
how do the financial systems work around there? Just wondering if that's coming into play at all.
Yeah. I mean, I have not really ever discriminated on location. I think there's lots of talented people everywhere. And
Absolutely.
so location is one factor. Maybe definitely before 2020, it was a bigger factor, but I think now less so.
Oh yeah, async has just become so much more common. Like,
Yeah.
and remote work's been enabled both synchronously and
Yeah.
asynchronously. And I mean, just the prevalence of Zoom and Slack and all these things that have
Yeah.
really burgeoned. It makes total sense. So you can
Yeah.
now recruit remotely worldwide, right?
Yeah.
So
But risk wise, I think like I've always personally been focused right now, like mostly on post revenue companies,
mm,
companies that are finding traction but still iterating on the idea, and then beyond that and later. So I think from a risk perspective, that risk is always there. They're new companies, they're early stage, but I think post revenue companies have significant de-risking from companies that are still figuring that out and haven't created any revenue. So
totally.
for me, I mean, I'm still looking at the same things, yeah, mostly seed and pre-A, Series A, timeline. So
So this brings up an interesting point. Before we had this conversation, you said something that I thought was intriguing, which
mm,
was this is the perfect time to join an early stage startup.
yeah,
Uh, why do you think that?
yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of kind of like ideas that you could frame it as. I think number one is that investing in equities or getting equity ownership in a company is a good hedge on inflation.
Yeah.
Instead of putting your money in cash and having it sit and dealing with the kind of like the inflationary kind of like results of that. You can put your time and your energy into a startup that you believe in, that's performing well, that has a great founding team, that can be a big business, these things, and that you find challenging and rewarding. And I think that, through the next few years, it's going to be really hard. But there's a lot of challenges that, if you're investing in yourself and you believe in the idea and the team that's there, equity ownership in that company can really mean a lot. And I think more and more people with all the layoffs and things like that are starting to look at early stage startups and what's the
Yeah.
opportunity, in as much as there's a group of those people also looking for the safer, kind of like big tech company or something like that
Right.
to kind of like, ride out the storm in. So I think the builders and the entrepreneurs and the operators who are willing to take that risk are actually going to build some amazing companies. And we saw that, coming out of the financial crisis in 2010, 2011. So
I think the talent opportunity for those founders is so much higher now too.
yeah,
Like, obviously it's a shame that we've seen such mass layoffs. I know it's very scary for a lot of folks, but
yeah,
it also means there are a lot of very talented people who maybe were paid to not do as much at a larger company
mhm,
and kind of rest and vest, so to speak.
yeah,
And now are saying, okay, I have to go find a new gig. Maybe, the Metas, the Facebooks, the
yeah,
Microsoft of the world aren't hiring quite as much.
hmm,
Let me go put some time in at a startup and see this potential upside around equity, but also bring this depth of experience and knowledge I have. So that's got to be encouraging for founders too. And I'll say just here at Linear B, we're seeing a rise in applications overall.
hmm,
And sure, part of that may be related to us doing well, but a lot of it, I think, is just the economic climate where things are going. And
yeah,
that talent quality is really rising. And I mean, we brought up remote work earlier, but
yeah,
that is also fully enabled as well. Like, okay, like maybe it used to be you needed to hire someone in San Jose because, you lived in San Jose, but now I could talk to someone in Denver or Lagos or,
yeah,
Hong Kong potentially if it works for the team and
hmm,
bring in these really talented individuals. So
yeah,
I totally agree with you. There's these structural opportunities for startups that are really beginning to emerge. And it feels like maybe encouraged by this SVB scariness as well,
hmm,
there may be an opportunity for other innovation sectors within the world to continue to rise, as we've seen with, Tel Aviv, Singapore, and elsewhere in the last several years.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think right now is probably the best time for entrepreneurs in America to get started on the hardest problems. Like, I think there's plenty of venture capitalists out there who would fund what they call, American dynamism companies, and
Mm.
take on a lot of things that will give America, advantages for the next couple of decades. We see a lot of defense startups. I think, defense is like kind of a touchy subject, but onshoring a lot of manufacturing for semiconductors is a big deal.
Totally.
Bringing a lot of that technology that we've kind of like pushed away for a long time back to the US, I think is an opportunity. And, I do think about this all the time, is that like the next, thing I want to do is go work at one of these companies or start one of my own. So
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So you're thinking founder next is kind of
We'll
where you're
see.
going.
We'll see.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
All right. You got a couple years of Kite here still, it seems like.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
There's plenty to do. Yeah.
Let's talk about Kyte a little bit. Really
Sure.
fascinating company. I mentioned on-demand vehicle delivery startup earlier, and I think it's interesting to talk about that based on your Uber background.
Yeah.
But yeah, what's Kyte for those listening?
Yeah. So, I mean, we like to define Kite as, basically providing you a car for any trip longer than a rideshare. Right now, we're focused on the more traditional kind of like rental experience and improving on that. It's an industry that hasn't changed in decades.
No,
There's literally a Seinfeld episode from the late 80s about the rental car desk and like,
still relevant.
getting a car, like booking a car, having a reservation there, and then not getting the car that you want, and like signing the paperwork and all of these other things. And I think like watching that episode, the experience really hasn't changed. So, pre-booking, we support web and mobile. We try to have like a mobile first experience overall. And the post-booking, you can see in real time the car being delivered to you. You can coordinate with we call them surfers, who bring you the car in real time. We have direct access to chat support. You can add an additional driver without having to go to the rental counter and, do any of that, kind of song and dance. We can do verification. So we identify the drivers and verify them. We use like, document scan and selfie and facial recognition. So we're using technology to kind of like further this kind of antiquated, experience for customers. And, really for us, it's about unlocking freedom for everybody, right? Like,
Mhm.
I think we saw it at Uber. There was a lot of underserved areas by the taxi industry. We were able to open that up using technology and kind of like remove that barrier. And I think Kite can do the same for car ownership, for the rental experience, and overall like subscriptions as well, right? So I don't own a car. I haven't owned a car in 9 years. It sort of played well for me to work at Uber for 7 years, but
Totally.
now I'm kind of doubling down on that with Kite, and I'm excited about it. So
Fantastic. What
yeah,
kind of metrics are you looking at to see whether Kyte's being successful
yeah.
and how you're thinking about the future?
Yeah, I mean, we look at utilization of the vehicle fleet overall. We own all the cars. We have what we call dark, lots in the 14 markets that we're in
Okay.
today in the U.S. So we look at utilization overall. We look at a lot of the same core metrics that most startups look at. LTV, CAC, all of these kind of like acquisition
Weekly
and growth
actives, monthly
metrics.
actives,
Yeah,
et cetera, et cetera.
but we're really starting to look at like system performance as a metric for the business. How often are customers interacting with the features that we're shipping that do kind of like wrap Kite's experience uniquely? And then, how do we take those specific features and double down on them to create even more differentiation for the customers that Kite's bringing? But similar to like I said, many companies will look at retention. We look at travelers versus like locals, and who's replacing a car, like car ownership, like I would, versus somebody who's traveling regularly for business or for work or for leisure. Are they bringing their family? All of these different types of customer cohorts and just like how the product gets used.
Can you give us an example of one of those features that you shipped maybe in the last few months and how you're deciding on success there? I'd love to dive in there. I think it's a really informative thing for product and engineering teams to think about because
Yeah.
it's so easy to get disconnected from, am I actually delivering value to users with this feature?
Yeah.
And say, oh, well, the C-suite was happy and, some people in sales really wanted this. So it's there,
Yeah.
but is it being utilized? Is it actually realizing value? So I'd love to
Yeah.
dive into that.
Yeah. I mean, one that comes to mind in particular, if you have rented a car in the last couple decades and, halfway through that trip, you need to add your spouse or a friend, there's some
Ooh.
reason that you're, kind of like trying to open up the opportunity for someone else to kind of assist you with whatever task you have that you rented a car for. You've got to drive back to the counter. You've got to show their ID. You've got to sign some paperwork. You have a like modified rental agreement. Somebody's printing that, usually on a dot matrix printer, and you have to sit through this whole thing. There's somebody typing into an interface for 30 minutes. And we don't really know what that interface does. But point being is that, we can like improve that experience and have using our additional driver feature. And so in the app, if you have an active trip, you literally tap a button, you get a share link that you can share just like you send a text message or any other link, to a friend. And they'll pop that open in a web browser. It'll deep link into the app. They can sign in. They can complete the verification process in
Very
under
cool.
30 seconds, and they can be added to your trip automatically. And so that feature in particular, it does two things for us. it creates this differentiated experience as we talked about, and like kind of up levels the car rental experience in general. But it also creates a growth, strategy for us because
Mm,
people are inviting their friends to trips. They see how easy it is to get a kite and invite their friends. They tend to sign up automatically when they get added to the trip and they go through verification. And then we see those folks booking 2 and 3 more trips after they've been added as an
very
additional
cool.
driver. And so it's kind of almost like a referral.
That's a great K factor. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like a referral for us, like a referral program, but it's involving them directly in the product, like from day one and getting them directly onto a trip.
How did that feature come about? I think that's a really illustrative example
Yeah.
of both where you've seen success with product and engineering work. But I would love to kind of back out of that and say, okay, what inspired it? How did you find that piece? Because I think that's something that a lot of startups look for is, okay, like what's the right way to decide on key features? And this one's clearly been successful for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, adoption is one. Like, we have a hypothesis, we go through the product discovery process and we say, do we think that, this particular effort will move the needle, a certain amount? We look at revenue per rental day, we look at, revenue per unit on a vehicle basis. And we try to determine, is the feature we're adding going to create more additional value in those metrics? And then we go back, hypothesize on what that feature might be. How do we improve on the experience that we're creating for users? And then, we experiment. We ship the lowest, kind of effort thing and try to iterate on it. So I tell our product team a lot, like downscope everything to the
Mm,
smallest degree.
great advice.
And we can talk about engineering strategy as well. But
Love to dive in there next.
yeah,
Yeah.
in the last year and a half, I mean, we have shipped and started moving the technology stack in a direction that removes engineering and in some cases product from the iteration cycle for the operations and markets teams.
Oh,
And so where we have business operations, markets, or where we have growth, we want to run experiments quickly and easily. We now have the software capability to look at, a million different dynamic configurations. So if we have different tax structure in New York City, in Manhattan or in Brooklyn or in Jersey City, we can actually distribute that across configurations. Software can read all of those things and the market operations team can make those modifications as needed. We can adjust prices. We can adjust, the latency of a feature. We
mm,
can adjust, tune lots of different parameters, and we can create this globally consistent experience where everybody's experiencing the product in the same way, but it's tailored, more towards the local constraints of their market. So that's been one of the big things that we've shipped is dynamic configuration and an experimentation platform in the last, year and a half. So.
what led you to that kind of modular approach?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of learnings from Uber, I think, because Uber did a really good job of creating this, global experience in 300, 400 plus cities during the time that I was there. And I went to India, I went to Southeast Asia in like 4 or 5 different markets, and I saw that the Uber that, I was using in San Francisco was very similar to the Uber that people are using in India. And there were different, kind of like product
It's
outcomes, right?
fine tuned differently.
You
Yeah.
could pay in cash in Southeast Asia and India, right? We
Yeah.
didn't have cash payments here, and the adoption of cash was much better in those markets. It fit that the market dynamic, and so, the product and growth teams, they figured out how to implement cash in a way that, was successful in those markets. And all of the constraints around cash and how to do payments and how to alter the product and both on the driver and the rider side, and those things were very modular in the product, and they did a good job of scaling that. So, because we have similar kind of market penetration and footprint and breadth, and we'll have more and more of that. We want to create that structure early and, kind of build that out in a way that's can make Kite very globally consistent, but, modified per market. So
This seems like a logical time to ask you, do you think Uber is still succeeding at that same kind of product innovation? Because I've seen some of your tweets. I know you have feelings on this.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of friends who work there, probably some of the best engineering culture in the world, and those folks are gone. I think that the way the company's been managed lately, like the level of innovation has significantly backtracked. I see, a lot of folks talking about app redesign and stuff like that. I mean, that's been 4 years in the works to create this kind of super app. And I'm not sure that when I open the Uber app or customers open the Uber app, they think about getting every single thing through Uber. And I think it's a bet. I think it's courageous to take that kind of bet and really look for that. But I'm not sure that strategy wouldn't have been more effective implemented faster to kind of like get more people thinking that way. You go into the pandemic and you really have to kind of burn a lot of the businesses and the core bets that really made
Mhm.
Uber successful in a lot of different ways. Like if you don't take moonshots, you don't get the microwave, you don't get, tinfoil, you don't get, the Tang and all these
Yeah.
other things that came out of that, these great innovations that we have as humanity because we're taking moonshots. And if you're not taking those, it does impact the culture overall and, how people feel about what they're building. And I think, the business has just kind of like reacted to more of the market need and less of maybe the customer need. And I think, that's an advantage startup has, build for speed and focus, listen to your customers and build what they want. If you're not doing that, I don't know. I don't know what you're doing right.
If I put you in charge of Uber's product and engineering teams, and it's like
Yeah.
suddenly Nick, hey, and you're the new head of all engineering and product at Uber. You've got
Yeah.
this like carte blanche to reimagine how Uber's taking their approach.
Yeah.
What would you do to try to inject more of that innovation DNA or improve what you're seeing as far as outcomes?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the dog food and culture seems to have disappeared. And I
Mm,
think that's the big thing. We're creating that at Kyte. We want everybody internally using the product as often as possible. The first thing that I would want to fix, just like personally, is dispatch latency in San Francisco. I know it's a
you're a San
tune.
Francisco native, right?
I'm from Memphis, but I live in San
Okay,
Francisco
yeah.
and I use the product. And, I just dropped a general kind of observation on Twitter and said, it feels like dispatch latency is like 3, 4 minutes when I request a car. I can kind of leave my phone and just go get a coffee, go do something else.
Yeah.
And, there was a realization that we had at Uber back in the day, which was people start to demand like a better experience year over year because they get used to the wait times being lower and they anticipate that,
So it's gone the other direction, it
yeah,
feels like.
and I think it's gone the other direction. And my hypothesis is they've integrated taxi into the supply and that they're doing that for, core business supply constraint reasons, I think, and partnership as well. And yeah, I mean, every time I get a taxi, it's a 10-minute dispatch. It takes forever, and I'm upset with the product experience right now. So that's something I would focus on.
It does feel like you have to, and this is super anecdotal,
Yeah,
but order your Uber farther in advance today.
yeah, yeah,
I'm not going to think, oh, I can get one quickly. I know I'm gonna have to wait a little while.
yeah,
And I think that's a great sticking point to mention
yeah.
where it's like, okay, there's been this big focus on becoming, North America's WeChat, it feels
Mhm.
like in some ways, where it's like,
Yeah,
we're going to have everything on here, grocery delivery,
yeah, super app.
everything you want to do. And it has missed out on some of that core business, which, I mean, I hear you on the whole, like maybe they could have gone faster on the super app and maybe that was the direction,
Yeah,
but because it's moved so slowly in some ways, and obviously pandemic headwinds have hurt it, uh, the core business now is, at least from a user perspective, suffering.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's still a lot of good people who work there. I
Of
still got
course, it's a huge company.
a lot of contacts, and friends that are still there. And I think they're really doing their best. I think that business always struggled with the business side, the making money side and rideshare. And it's a
Yeah.
hard business, right? Like it's a bits and atoms business. Anytime you have atoms in the real world, it's probably the hardest thing that you're going to do. But yeah, I agree with you. I think, you know, I was thinking about the app redesign further. It's like, we redesigned the Rider app in 2016, and that was an all hands on deck, overnight, every week burn, and everyone was excited and everyone was, kind of like pitching in and trying to solve this challenge. And I highly doubt anybody's staying at Uber after 5 PM these days.
Mm.
So, and I mean, that's not required. That's not,
And it's hard with an enterprise scale company where you
yeah,
start to get kind of abstracted away from that core team and feeling connected.
yeah. You start to lose that like do whatever it takes, kind of mentality and you stop believing in, some of the product and maybe even the innovation, level of the company. So, but yeah, I mean, they're still working at it and, I'm rooting for them, but, I'm going to give them some feedback along the way. So,
Yeah, totally. Is there an enterprise that you see today that is doing a good job with that dog fooding approach you mentioned? Because I think that was a really important point that maybe
yeah,
gets ignored as companies scale sometimes.
yeah. I mean, I think Airbnb is doing pretty good with
Mm,
dog fooding. I think that they've always had an internal kind of culture of use the product, even put your own home up. At some points, I had some friends there that were like putting their home on
interesting.
Airbnb
Yeah.
to test, the supply side of the
They've always had that
business.
encouraging employees to use the app to
That's
go
right. Yeah.
travel to other
Yeah.
locations and visit offices. That's a great point.
The culture, I think they called it internally, was the culture of being a host. And I think
Mm,
that was really important, the early part of Airbnb DNA. And I know folks who are there now who really enjoy using Airbnb, as customers, and they dog food the product. They they look at that. And I think, Brian Chexie, they rolled out this Airbnb experiences. And I think that's what
Very cool
I've
product.
always wanted
Yeah.
from Airbnb, for a long time. So I think that they are, they have come around to realizing that, and adjust it to what customer needs or have gone.
Particularly since they are having some issues on the fee side. And
Yeah.
I'll give them credit that they rolled
Yeah.
out that beta to look at, cleaning fees and other fees included
Totally.
in total
Yeah.
price, which I think is the right call. I
Yeah.
personally think they should go the full direction with
Mhm.
that, because there are certain hosts that are, I don't want to say grifting, but like earning off of that. And
Yeah.
it's throwing off the experience when you go to check out. You're like, this is, significantly more than I expected.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of resort fee is this? God.
Yeah.
But I think for some of us that, particularly as you're doing like business travel, it's pushed you back towards hotels where it's like, oh, I know
Yeah.
the experience I'm going to get. I can just go do this.
Yeah.
Um,
Cheaper in a lot of ways. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
But to your point, like the experiences piece, which is, I think, a lot of why many of us started using Airbnb in the first place was, oh, I can go have like a really interesting house. And
Yeah.
so leaning into that, it makes sense as far as, the phrase that we hear a lot recently from, I'll acquired a lot of credit here is, does this make your beer taste better? And, Airbnb's core product here is like, hey, this is a unique experience that you're not going to get somewhere else. So
Yeah.
I totally agree with you on that approach. And it's
Yeah.
interesting to see how the dog fooding side of that probably did heavily inform
Yeah.
that product choice. Are there other companies that you see having a lot of success with that, either in startups or on the enterprise side?
I could probably think of a few, but don't think of too many, here on the spot. I think, the world that I came from, not to keep segueing for you a little
No,
bit,
go for
but,
it.
the self-driving world and the dog fooding of like the cruise product that's going on right now. I mean, they've had cruise employees taking those rides for a while. There's another company, I think Waymo. I'm not sure if Waymo's
yeah.
got like an internal rides program or not.
I believe they do.
Yeah. But you see like the app, the app seems to be well built. It's a great experience in San Francisco so far. You see that, they've really thought about the customer experience and how are people going to get into this car and be validated and, kind of understand what to do when there's no human there to kind of like massage the experience or kind of hand hold it along. And so I think that, those companies are starting to kind of like implement that heavy dog food and culture and try to get more and more people, including like VIP customers and stuff, dog food in the product. So there's a little bit of a bubble with those things because as you build that new technology, you kind of want to make sure the technology works and,
Yeah.
the experience kind of comes with it once the technology's there. But, I mean, I see that employees there seem to be using the product quite heavily. So got some friends over there.
I'd love to talk about self-driving a bit more because
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm not quite a skeptic, but I have concerns. Like, more broadly, I'll say I lean into urbanism. I love that there's this idea that we can share cars and try to limit car usage on the road because I think there's so many negative impacts on cities. I love to walk. We're in New York right now. I love the opportunity to kind of walk around and not feel like I need to have a car here.
Yeah.
And I can also have easy access through, whether it's a Kyte or an Uber, there's another option to, if I do need to take a quick trip.
Yeah.
But there is a potential opportunity to build self-driving cars that could really free up time
Yeah.
and improve the experience of transportation. What is happening in the space there? I'd love to talk a bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing that's happened is that the market has realized how hard of a problem this
Oh
is. And,
God. I think we all thought like, we is a broad term. I think the media started to hype up the idea that,
Yeah.
this is going to happen soon. It's like, there's a lot that has to happen to make
Yeah.
this as effective as it needs to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a lot of perception and reality. I think one thing I kind of applaud Travis for a little bit is that, the harder you push on some ideas, the broader they become, and you actually are changing the world. You're not just changing, you're changing an entire industry. You're not just kind of like doing something unique as a company. And I think there was a lot of hype behind that. A lot of things, kind of a
Hype
lot of
cycles
companies jump back on that.
thing.
I mean, if you went to Pittsburgh in 2013 and you went back in 2016, you'd be amazed at the level of change in that city. They used the strength of their robotics program at CMU. There were multiple companies built on this technology and the things that they were doing at CMU NREC and a bunch of other places. And Uber was kind of the first shepherd of that. Now, granted, Google and Facebook and these other companies have been in Pittsburgh for a while, but you see this tech ecosystem in Pittsburgh just really blow up. And I think like the market has caught up to the reality that this is a very hard problem, that it is very difficult to map individual operational domains over the course of a city and scale the operation. They know that, shipping thousands of vehicles around to a different city, like we still only have footprint in 2 or 3 major cities in the US where Waymo or Cruise or somebody else has been successful in getting that deployed. And so I think the reality of the cost and the difficulty of the technology is kind of caught up. So that's the first thing I see. I think, what's going on there now, I think, is that they're starting to bring, that we always had this question, I guess, at Uber ATG, which was like, are customers really like going to accept this technology, or what's the level of acceptance that they will have? And the only real way to do that is to get those vehicles in the real world, show them the safety record, show them the benefits, and have them, interact with the product. And I see that we're kind of in that phase now in certain markets. I don't like pretend to know all the intricacies of how
Sure.
to scale a self-driving operation. I can tell you about the infrastructure and the developer experience that I contributed to with a great team. But I think this notion of operational domains, mapping, gathering a lot of edge case data, and then trying to build through simulation, I think that's probably the most scalable approach they can take right now. And using heavy compute, lots of GPUs, like all of this kind of stuff, like we see these companies doing, they'll continue to scale, hopefully, the safety record and the technology capabilities through those means, and burn those things down over a long list. But yeah, I think they still have a long way to go.
It's a big challenge.
Yeah.
I'd love to dive a bit into that infrastructure and developer experience topic you mentioned
Yeah, yeah.
around self-driving.
Mhm.
You're someone who's worked in that space for a while. And I think it's a very exciting space for a lot of technologists to say, oh, like
Yeah.
this is something that, when I was a kid, I thought about as the future, right?
Yeah.
Where do you see, or let me just give it very broadly.
Yeah.
How should developers be thinking about these kind of big problems and how to solve them? And how should engineering leaders be guiding teams on that course?
Yeah. I mean, the way that I would say engineering leaders could guide, like I'm a fan of kind of throwing out controversial statements,
Okay.
having the team disagree with me and prove me wrong in some cases. Like sometimes, like we're going through that right now at Kyte, like have an awesome engineering and product team. And one of the challenges I gave them is that every single thing we build should be fully in production. We're going to delete our staging environment. Everything needs to be
Oh, that's
feature flagged.
controversial. Okay.
And, we're gonna put everything into a test market that, no one can discover. Like, we have a city in the world that we're gonna use for a test market. All the experiments are on, and, let's deal with the constraints of trying to test everything in the real world and build that, kind of atoms thing. I think for engineering leaders, like, there's a big chunk of that kind of, stretch work and kind of goals that you can set for the team, and they'll tell you if you have a good team. I think, most teams can be really good when they're pushed. And they will tell you what's wrong with the strategy, I think. The cool things going on in like the self-driving developer experience and like infrastructure world, they work a lot with mega repositories. So it's not a language specific, JavaScript monorepo or a Python monorepo. It's a mega repo that has Terraform and C++ and Python and Go and all of the things that they're
Yeah.
doing there. And secret management, and it uses Bazel, in a lot of cases. And so the stuff that they're doing to speed up build times there, I think that will have ripple effects on how you see developer experience work at lots of big tech
It's a great
companies
point, actually.
that haven't dealt with mega repo but are doing monorepo things. They're learning from that ecosystem, and they're applying it at an even bigger scale. They're doing kind of crazy things that they have to do because they have a hardware side of the product. They're compiling, CUDA libraries like from scratch, and they're doing it next to a bunch of other, kind of like um, programming languages that don't always fit together in a repository. And so I think there will be, a lot of innovation come about from companies that are having those hard problems. Trunk.io is one company. David Aperian and Ellie Schleifer, they started that company based on their experience working at ATG and
Mm.
the hard developer challenges that we had with simulation and perception, and trying to fuse all that together with just like standard run-of-the-mill software development they were doing for various purposes. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for developers to kind of think about what's coming out of these places. Maybe they're not talking about it, maybe they are, but what's coming out of these places that is a very broad approach to something I'm doing, maybe in a little more niche, but the same principles apply. Yeah.
It's really interesting to think about some of those challenges and how they get solved and how they then percolate out throughout the rest of the industry.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you're doing within Kyte or within your past work leading teams at Uber to solve problems for your engineering teams?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the things that we've been focused on in the last year and a half at Kyte, the team has really done a great job of pushing through just architecture changes in general. We're not building for a scale that, in the immediate term, that's going to be millions of trips per day and that kind of stuff. And so we don't
Give it
really,
3 years, maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
ideally, yeah, that would be great. We're not pushing the team and kind of envisioning that, that's the scale we need to develop at, but we are starting to advance the state of the technology towards that more modular kind of software architecture. A year and a half I joined, there was not a real great like data infrastructure. So we have an amazing data infrastructure now. It's built on S3 and we use Athena and lots of other tools, to kind of like provide all of that data to the internal team and then, let them do their own analytics and create analytics products and data products around it. We're trying to create the experimentation and like dynamic configuration culture there. With the kind of like focus on post booking, like mobile first experience. We're doing a lot of things to get the mobile team kind of set up for success there, which is that internal release process, dog fooding, those kind of things. But over the course of the next, year or so, we're looking at what is the kind of current constraints of the software architecture we have? Do we need to improve data model or schemas or, relationships? Is there performance issues in the data stores we're using where we can make, we can have a slight advantage. We don't have to rewrite the entire stack around, this, new update to data stores that we're doing. And, we're not doing anything significantly drastic. But, we are getting set up this year for machine learning and how we apply models to pricing and verification. And one of our hard challenges is balancing vehicles between lots in a city. So we'll do
Interesting.
multi-lot routing. We'll forecast and anticipate what are the next trips coming out of this lot, and we'll use technology and machine learning to kind of like optimize that overall picture of the market, and basically using that forecast, have our surfers pick up cars and bring them back to the lot to forecast the next trip. And we can kind of do that logistical balancing in a sophisticated way. And it's a significant efficiency gain for our business overall. And I think a differentiating advantage as well.
Absolutely. I love how you consistently bring back every piece of the product and your approach to how did this differentiate us and how does this apply to real world customers
Yeah.
or bring broad efficiencies internally.
Yeah.
And I think one of the challenges some engineering leaders have is when they come into a new org, like you did a year and a half ago at Kyte, and they say, okay, how do I make sure the culture shifts to what I need it to be, whether that's experimentation and dog fooding, whether that's, I want to approach things with feature flags and really experiment and market. How do you create that shift when you come into a new organization like you've done at Kyte?
Yeah. I mean, you have to kind of look at like meet people where they are. There's a current set of problems, right? Like one of the issues that we had when I joined is that we just weren't great at incident management, right? And we're still not perfect at it. Incident management is actually an art. It's not, easy at any company, and it's done differently in a lot of different places. I think there's generally a paradigm around incident management and how to do that. But how to do it for your business successfully is an art. And so we're getting better there. That was a muscle that we didn't really have that we started to flex, and we say, hey, if we get good at incident management and resolving things for that operational, that Atom side of the business, we create safety for ourselves to make these investments in engineering and have more time for bottoms up work. And so we have created that safety with the team. It's given them the opportunity to work on real-time service layers, geostores, and streaming like location data in, where I think a year and a half ago, we would not look at our engineering stack and say, we're going to be streaming live location from, all the consumer devices or the server devices or the vehicles, so that we can create an experience where when those things all come together, the customer really feels like this is very different. The surfer really feels like they're on a sophisticated platform and they're contributing to, the growth of the business. And, from a vehicle perspective, we always know where everything is and, we can be very efficient in that regard. So I think like creating space and safety for engineers, listening to the team, letting them kind of plan bottoms up projects along with, product endeavors and things like that, and prioritizing those things accordingly. We've been pretty successful at, I think, like creating the right environment to have that kind of innovation culture and support the ideas, from the team.
It sounds like in particular, you came in and you said, I'm identifying a problem that exists, which is, in this case, incident management, where it's taking away from our ability to really build new and focus on the innovation piece. How can I solve this key problem that's a blocker for my engineers? Maybe it's cutting into their focus time. Maybe it's creating context switching that is, inhibiting the work. How can I solve that and then enable the rest of my team simply by freeing up hours, freeing up time, and then slowly kind of build that culture and meld it to the way you want to approach it? Is that an accurate interpretation?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, there's also just cultural nuance things too, right? Like it's very easy to be in that situation and say, well, we need, or we should. And, I constantly tell the team, like, we will and we
Okay.
are the phrases I want to hear. And like the phrases that I'm personally using, like when I write down goals, I don't say we need to build this. We will build this actually. And this is something that is coming for Kyte. And I think, using that sort of like bias towards action language, it helps create this atmosphere where folks feel like the things that they're sharing and that they're seeing are problems are actually things that we're going to work on. And they're not just kind of like stuff that we need to do in the future at some nebulous time and, place and time.
That's a nice mental reframing. What
Yeah.
led you to start approaching these conversations that way?
Yeah, I think, um, I think like founders could probably identify with this problem, and I identify with this problem just like as I've hired other engineering leaders or worked with other team members. It's very easy to have worked at a big company. I went through this experience myself, which is why I identify with it. But it's very easy to have worked at a big company, particularly like an Uber or someplace similar, and see all the engineering rigor that was done. And a lot of Uber had its culture of building too many things internally,
Yeah.
but seeing all those things and you kind of miss a lot of some of that technology and some of those systems that were in place. And so you start to form this mentality about like what we need as opposed to what the business actually requires at that point in time. And so, yes, it's nice to have that experience to come from that place and say, yeah, we have all of these things that we need to build or we should put in place in a perfect world. But what Kyte needs right now, or what this company needs right now is really these like, we will, we are kind of statements where I'm not, kind of envisioning that we're going to work on these things, again, at some nebulous place in time. We're not building everything in the ideal sense. We're building what we need to build right now, and sort of addressing real problems and empowering the team to bias towards action. I think that's the big kind of like focus there is we're not creating plans. We're doing work.
Yeah. That bias towards action is such a
Yeah.
key part, right? I
Yeah.
hear it from so many of the best founders and engineering leaders where they say, look, particularly early, you need to execute
Yeah.
and you can't spend too much time planning in advance. Like you're going to learn so much more from, to borrow a phrase in military history, first contact with the enemy, because your
Yeah.
plan's going to fall apart. You're going to realize you have to change everything.
Absolutely.
And that learning process is enabled by the execution you talk about, where like that fast iteration, which I can tell you're really encouraging within your Kyte culture by the dog fooding, by the feature flag and leveraging things in different
Yeah.
markets to experiment. So, it's a bit of a chaos engineering approach in some ways, where you're going in and saying like, all right, let's experiment with this in prod to see if we break something and
Yeah.
like, go back to it. Do you take inspiration from that kind of methodology?
I think a little bit. Yeah. I mean, the founders of Kyte and just generally like the company at large have a really strong culture of getting better every day. And that's one of our cultural values. It's something that we all try to live by. We have kind of very strong company ownership, I think, across all teams. One very unique thing about Kyte is that it feels like everyone is working together towards the same kind of set of problems and challenges. You don't always get that feeling on a team. So it's very unique. And I think, this mentality of iterating quickly, bias towards action, like, experimenting, it's okay to fail, kind of culture. Obviously we don't want to keep creating failure. We want to learn from our mistakes,
Sure.
right? But this idea of getting better every day is really
We'll
kind
fail
of
on new
underpinning.
things, right? Like
Exactly.
we're going to fail on this
Exactly.
one. We're going to learn from it. We're going to fail on a new
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
I mean, just being honest, like not every product we've shipped or every feature we've shipped has gotten great adoption. And
Yeah.
there's many reasons for that. And we dig into them and we iterate and we get better. And, product management is, it's kind of an interesting science. You hypothesize that you can have some impact to some key metric in the business or some customer, kind of excellence, scorecard, and you ship something. And if it doesn't land, you iterate on it, you try again, so.
That definitely resonates with
Yeah.
me. I had a really good conversation with Nora Jones, founder at
Yeah.
Jelly.io,
Yeah.
about this concept yesterday, where
Yeah.
she was talking about her approach of saying, look, we need to learn from incidents. We don't spend enough time digging into the why of incidents and how our response flowed, and really spending that time to learn, because this is such a crucial opportunity, right?
Yeah.
When you fail, when you have mistakes, like that's when you should really spend time to evaluate and then iterate. And I hear that kind of same philosophy from you coming through and how you're approaching things,
Yeah.
particularly with what you mentioned earlier, where you said, okay, we need to come in, we need to improve how we're doing incidents response. Am I right to take this and also kind of extrapolate that you're also spending a lot of time on that learning process around incidents?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we have a postmortem culture. We do a review of incidents every 2 weeks. I think my team is a little over me trying to review every single, like one of the incidents that
You're
we've
like, no,
had.
this is important.
It's customer facing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think like, the two hardest problems I think in engineering, other than naming services, is like communication and project management. And
Yeah.
those are skills that I think engineers learn to get really good at when you have an incident. You have to communicate the incident to the business. We have a significant physical world business. Those folks on the ground need to know, why is revenue getting impacted? They sit in the parking garage and they see whether or not the cars are moving in and out. And so communicating that incident helps them understand, what's going on the software side of the business. If we have an incident, some downtime, conversion rate issue, anything like that. But then on the project management side, we had some follow-ups, we have some actions to go take to make the system better over time. We learned a bunch of stuff from the incident. I need to project manage those things, prioritize them, and make sure they actually get delivered and followed through on. And so I think that those skills help engineers, again, get better every day, right? So
Absolutely. Are there any other takeaways that you would have for engineers and engineering leaders listening to this conversation where it's like, hey, here are the key things that have made me successful or that I think are crucial moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would call myself successful in any regard. I just like enjoy what I do. And I think like, my big thing is always just say yes to every opportunity and treat everything, even the projects you don't want to work on, as a learning opportunity. So I think, in my career, I've been fortunate to have a lot of managers who have given me the opportunity to do things I didn't want to do things I did, and always just tried to say yes. I think in some cases, I've said no, but in most cases tried to say yes. And, I think I started in kind of dinosaur IT, and I look back, maybe 9 or 10 years ago, I was still in that world. And so like what's changed in the last decade has just been, forcing myself to be uncomfortable and then saying yes to things that, I get challenged with, every day. So, I'm working on security right now. It's not my
Not your cup
greatest
of tea.
forte,
Yeah.
not my background. Right. But, we're learning, and we're working on compliance and security and those things. And that's not something I had the luxury of doing at Uber. We had a great team at Uber that was working on that. And so, it's something new and it's exciting and challenging. Same thing with P&L and financials. I'm not an MBA, but I'm learning to read these spreadsheets and everything.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's another incident management and reporting and learning thing,
that's
right?
right. Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
it's really interesting that you kind of close with that learn from trying things piece.
Yeah.
Cause I think that's again, another common trait for successful leaders. I
Yeah.
know you don't want to define yourself with that. I'm just going to do it
It's
for you.
okay. Yeah. Thank you.
An example that I really loved last year, we had Sarvnaz Mislicki on the podcast. She's a VP of technology at American Express. And she talked about this feeling where she said, every time she starts feeling comfortable, she's like, oh, I have to do something different
Yeah.
because I need to go say yes to something and try something new that's going to push me outside my comfort zone. And
Yeah.
I see that in the best product teams, the best engineering teams, and the best leaders as they take that approach. So Nick, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and
Thanks for
sharing
having
this
me. Yeah.
perspective and your thoughts,
Thank you.
diving into some controversial topics. But it's been a great conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, we will have another live stream coming up in May. Really excited to share that with you. Details will follow this event. Keep an eye out in your inbox so you're ready. And if you haven't already, be sure to sign up for the Dev Interrupted Substack. It's the best place to find news about community events, learn about your favorite podcast guests like Nick, and read articles about everything that's happening in engineering technology. Thanks so much for watching.